The diner was quiet except for the low hum of the jukebox, playing a tune too old for most of the kids who hung out there. The smell of coffee and fried eggs lingered in the air, settling into the cracked leather booths and the faded checkerboard tiles. It was the kind of place people went when they wanted a cheap meal, a familiar face, or just a few minutes to escape the weight of life. At a corner booth, a man sat alone with his back straight and his eyes lowered to the steaming mug of coffee between his hands. His hair was close, cropped, streaked with gray at the temples. He wore a simple flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, and on his right forearm, just beneath the cuff, the edge of an old tattoo was visible, ink faded but unmistakable to anyone who knew what it meant. He didn't speak much, he never did. The regulars knew him only as Jack, the quiet single dad who came in after long shifts at the local mechanic's garage. He always ordered black coffee, sometimes pie if his daughter wasn't with him, and he paid in cash. Most never asked about the tattoo. They thought maybe it was from his time in the service. They didn't know how deep those roots went. That night though, Jack wasn't looking for peace. He was just tired. Bone, deep, soul, heavy tired. He'd been working overtime to keep up with bills and the medical costs for his little girl. Life hadn't been kind, but he didn't complain. Complaints didn't fix things. He just sat in silence, hands wrapped around the coffee, trying to breathe. The door to the diner banged open, jolting the quiet. A burst of cold night air followed three men in their 20s as they stumbled inside, laughing too loudly, their voices sharp against the stillness. They wore leather jackets, torn jeans, and the kind of cocky smirks that said they thought the world owed them something. "Hey, look at this dump." One of them sneered, tossing his cigarette to the floor and grinding it out with his boot. The waitress, Mary, barely flinched. She'd seen their kind before. She kept her eyes down and asked, "Table for 3. The tallest one, broad-shouldered with a buzz cut, leaned over the counter. "Nah, sweetheart, we'll sit wherever we damn well please." He winked at her, loud enough for everyone to hear. The other two laughed. They chose the booth near Jack's, deliberately bumping into his table as they passed. His coffee trembled in its cup, but he didn't move, didn't speak. "Watch it." One of them chuckled, looking at him with a sneer. Old man's hogging a whole booth for himself. Jack didn't raise his eyes. He'd learned long ago that silence was stronger than anger. But silence, to men like these, was gasoline on a flame. "What's that?" the leader asked, squinting at Jack's forearm as he leaned in. His eyes caught the tattoo. The dagger and wings, inked into the flesh with symbols surrounding it. He didn't understand it, but he knew enough to mock what he didn't know. "What is that? Some biker gang mark? Or are you just playing soldier?" Jack finally looked up. His eyes were calm, unreadable, but behind them lay storms that none of these boys had ever faced. He didn't answer. The leader smirked, his pride swelling. "Too good to talk, huh? What are you? Some washed-up vet crying into your coffee. Think that ink makes you tough?" Jack's jaw tightened, but still, he said nothing. The tension spread through the diner like a crack in glass. The regulars shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward Mary behind the counter, hoping she would intervene, but she was frozen, fear etched on her face. Then, with sudden aggression, the leader slapped Jack across the face. The sound cracked through the diner, echoing louder than the jukebox. Cups rattled. A fork clattered to the floor. Everyone froze. Jack didn't move. It looked like he hadn't even felt it. He just stared straight ahead, fingers steady on his coffee mug. But inside, something shifted. He wasn't thinking about himself. He wasn't thinking about pride. He was thinking about his daughter. The girl who depended on him. The promise he made to protect her, and to never let the darkness of his past life bleed into hers. The leader laughed, a harsh, hollow sound. "That's what I thought. Just a weak old man." But the laughter was cut short when Jack finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, with an edge sharp enough to slice through bone. "You should walk away." The diner went silent. Even the jukebox seemed to lower its volume. The leader scoffed, trying to shake off the chill that ran down his spine. "Or what?" he challenged. "You gonna cry on me, soldier boy?" Jack stood, slowly. His chair scraped against the floor with a sound that made the other two flinch. He was taller than they expected, broader too. And as the light caught his face, they saw the scars etched into his skin. Scars that told stories none of them could imagine. The leader's bravado wavered, but he forced a smirk. "Sit down, old man. You don't want this." Jack rolled his sleeve up, revealing the full tattoo. The dagger, the wings, the numbers inked in code beneath. The regulars gasped softly, recognition dawning in some of their eyes. Delta Force. Not just a soldier. A ghost. A legend whispered about in the military. Men who fought where no one else could. Men who did things the world would never know. Jack's gaze locked onto the leader. His voice dropped lower, colder. You slapped the wrong man. And in that moment, the entire diner knew. The night had just shifted into something none of them would forget. The leader's smirk faltered, though he tried to cover it with bravado. His friends snickered behind him, egging him on, but their laughter rang hollow, forced. There was something in the older man's eyes that unsettled them. A weight, a stillness that didn't belong to an ordinary mechanic or washed-up veteran. Jack didn't move fast. He didn't need to. Every deliberate step he took forward sent a ripple of tension through the room. The scrape of his boots against the linoleum was louder than the thug's nervous chuckles. Man, don't let him stare you down. One of the lackeys whispered to the leader, though his own voice trembled. The leader clenched his jaw, unwilling to lose face in front of his friends. He squared his shoulders and pushed Jack's chest with an open palm. Sit down, Grandpa. I don't care what tattoos you've got. You're in my way. Jack didn't stumble. He didn't flinch. He just blinked slowly, as though calculating 1,000 different outcomes in a fraction of a second. He remembered nights in sand-choked deserts, ambushes in jungles where every leaf could hide an enemy. This was nothing. But it wasn't about pride. It was about teaching these young men what their arrogance could cost them before they made the same mistakes in a world far less forgiving. The entire diner watched, breaths held. Mary's hands shook so hard she dropped a plate behind the counter. No one moved to pick it up. Jack spoke again, voice measured. You don't know who I am. And you don't want to find out. The leader scoffed, but his eyes betrayed the first flicker of doubt. What, you some kind of war hero? This ain't a battlefield, old man. This is real life. Jack's lip twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a snarl. Real life, he repeated softly, almost to himself. His mind flashed to the faces of his unit. Men who never came back, missions no one would ever write in history books. He thought about the promises he'd made to them. And to his daughter who was all he had left. Real life had taught him harder lessons than these punks could imagine. The leader's bravado spiked again, fueled by fear he didn't recognize. He shoved Jack harder this time, trying to break the tension. I said sit. He never finished. Jack's hand shot up, faster than anyone could track. He didn't strike, he simply caught the leader's wrist mid-motion. The sound of the man's bones grinding beneath Jack's grip was loud in the silence. The leader's cocky smirk twisted into a grimace as pain shot through his arm. Stop. Jack commanded. His tone not raised, but final. It wasn't a request. It was the kind of command drilled into men who had led others into fire and expected to be obeyed. The leader tried to jerk his arm back, but Jack held firm, unmoving, like steel anchored to the earth. The lackeys took a half step forward, but Jack's eyes snapped to them, cold and sharp, and they froze where they stood. For a moment, it was as though the weight of a battlefield descended on that diner. The kind of weight that pressed into lungs, made knees weak, and whispered that death was watching. You think strength is this? Jack said, tightening his grip just enough to make the young man groan. Picking on strangers. Slapping men in diners. That's weakness. The leader hissed in pain, his confidence crumbling. Let go of me. Jack leaned closer, his voice dropping to a growl that only the three could hear. Delta Force doesn't let go. Not until the mission's done. And right now, my mission is making sure you don't hurt anyone in here again. Recognition flickered in the lackey's eyes. They didn't know the details, but they'd heard the whispers. Everyone had. The tattoo wasn't some biker gang mark. It was a death mark to those who understood. Delta operators weren't just soldiers, they were shadows. The kind of men governments denied existed until the impossible needed doing. The leader finally buckled, his bravado collapsing under the crushing realization that he'd picked the wrong fight. He tried to mask it, spitting out a weak, You're nothing but a washed-up killer." Jack's grip tightened one last time before he released him, sending the man stumbling back into his booth. He stood tall, eyes never leaving the trio, and said in a voice that chilled the air, "I'm a father. And that's the only reason you're still breathing." Silence filled the diner. Mary stood frozen, her hand over her mouth. The other patrons watched with wide eyes, unsure whether to clap or pray. The three punks sat stiffly, the leader clutching his wrist, face pale. For once, they had no comebacks, no laughter, no swagger. Jack sat back down in his booth, lifted his coffee, and sipped it as though nothing had happened. The tension in the room didn't leave, but it shifted. Respect now hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. For a long moment, no one dared to speak. Then the leader muttered something under his breath, grabbing his jacket with his good hand. "We're out of here." The lackeys didn't argue. They stumbled toward the door, eager to escape the storm they had awakened. But just before leaving, the leader cast one last glance at Jack, fear mixed with something darker. A promise of trouble not yet over. The bell above the door jingled as they left, and the cold night air rushed in again. Jack didn't watch them go. He knew men like that didn't learn from a single warning. Trouble had a way of circling back. And for the first time in years, he felt the old instincts stirring. The ones he'd buried for his daughter's sake. He closed his eyes, hearing the echoes of his past, and whispered to himself, "Stay buried. Don't come back." But somewhere deep inside, he already knew. It was too late. The neon sign flickered, humming against the silence of the street. Jack remained in his booth long after the three punks had left, sipping the last of his coffee as though nothing had happened. The regulars whispered among themselves, voices low and uneasy, and Mary tried to calm her hands enough to pour fresh cups for the customers still too rattled to leave. Jack paid in cash, dropped a tip on the table, and gave Mary a nod. "Lock the door early tonight," he told her quietly. His voice was gentle, but something in his eyes made her swallow hard and nod back. Stepping into the cool air, Jack zipped his jacket against the night chill. His old truck sat across the lot, the same dented Chevy he'd driven since returning home. It wasn't much, but it ran, and more importantly, it was reliable. His daughter Emily depended on reliable. He thought about her now, probably asleep with her hair spread across the pillow, hugging the stuffed bear he'd given her on her 6th birthday. She was 10 now, growing fast, too fast. Jack carried her world on his shoulders, and he'd made a vow long ago that nothing would ever touch her. But as he slid behind the wheel and turned the ignition, headlights flicked on behind him. His rearview mirror filled with the glow of another car, creeping closer, slow and deliberate. Jack's stomach tightened. The punks. He didn't have to see their faces to know. Trouble didn't wait, it always followed. The car pulled out after him, tailing him down the empty streets of town. Jack's jaw clenched as he kept his speed steady, his hands calm on the wheel. He knew better than to lead them straight home. Emily was there. He couldn't risk it. Instead, he turned down side roads, testing them, watching. Each turn he made, they mirrored. Finally, Jack eased the truck into an abandoned lot behind the old mill. The shadows swallowed his vehicle whole. He cut the engine, opened the door, and stepped out, the gravel crunching under his boots. The other car rolled to a stop a few yards away. The leader climbed out, his wrist wrapped in a makeshift bandage. Face twisted in a mix of anger and humiliation. His two friends flanked him, one carrying a tire iron, the other slipping brass knuckles onto his hand. "You think you embarrassed me back there?" The leader snarled, stepping forward. "You think you can lay hands on me in front of everyone, and just walk away?" Jack stood with his hands loose at his sides, calm but unyielding. His voice was even. "You should have walked away when I told you to." The leader barked a laugh, though it rang hollow in the night air. "What are you gonna do, old man? Flash your little tattoo again? That scare trick won't work now. This time, it's just you and us." The lackeys grinned, emboldened, but Jack didn't flinch. Instead, he glanced past them, scanning the area with the instincts of a man who had survived ambushes deadlier than this. The mill was deserted, its rusted skeleton looming in the darkness. No witnesses. No one to intervene. He didn't want this. He had buried this part of himself long ago. But they weren't leaving him a choice. Jack spoke softly, almost regretfully. "You don't understand what line you've crossed." The leader's patience snapped. With a roar he lunged forward, swinging at Jack with his good hand. But Jack moved. Not fast, not flashy. Just efficient. A sidestep, a twist of the wrist, and the leader was on the ground in seconds, breath knocked out of him, face in the dirt. The other two rushed in. The one with the tire iron swung wide, a clumsy arc filled with raw anger. Jack ducked low, his hand snapping up to strike the attacker's ribs. The man gasped, weapon dropping as pain stole the air from his lungs. The brass knuckles came next, a fist cutting toward Jack's jaw. Jack blocked with his forearm, the impact sharp but absorbed, then pivoted, driving his shoulder into the man's chest. The thug stumbled back, wheezing, the fight leaking from him with every breath. It was over in less than 30 seconds. 3 men who thought they understood violence now lay groaning in the gravel, their pride shattered. Jack stood above them, chest steady, breathing calm as if he had just walked up a flight of stairs. His eyes, however, burned, not with rage, but with the weight of a man who'd seen too much, done too much. He crouched beside the leader, gripping his collar and forcing him to meet his gaze. "I don't want to see you in that diner again. I don't want to hear you laid a hand on anyone in this town. Because if you do," his voice dropped lower, darker, a whisper heavy with truth, "I won't stop at a warning next time." The leader's bravado shattered completely. He nodded quickly, fear wide in his eyes. "Oh, okay man. We get it." Jack released him, stood, and walked back to his truck. He didn't look back as he started the engine and drove off, the echoes of their groans fading into the night. But even as the road opened before him, Jack knew the truth. Men like that didn't forget humiliation. They nursed it, fed it, let it fester until it turned into something worse. And though he told himself it was over, deep down he felt the old instincts refusing to sleep again. His past wasn't buried. It was waiting. When Jack finally pulled into his driveway, the porch light flickered on. Emily's silhouette appeared in the upstairs window, her little hand waving sleepily before she disappeared again. Jack's chest tightened. She was his reason, his mission. And he knew, with grim certainty, that trouble wasn't gone. It was only just beginning. Town with a pale glow, but for Jack sleep had been shallow and restless. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching Emily pour cereal into her bowl. Her hair was messy, her pajamas mismatched, and her eyes half closed, but she smiled at him with the effortless warmth only a child could give. "Daddy, are you working late again tonight?" she asked between spoonfuls. Jack's throat tightened. He hated the way she always had to ask, hated that her childhood was filled with questions about schedules and bills instead of carefree laughter. He reached across the table, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not tonight, Bug. I'll be home." Her smile widened. "Can we watch a movie?" Jack forced a grin. "Yeah. Anything you want." But beneath the promise, unease coiled in his chest. Last night's encounter still hung in the back of his mind, a shadow refusing to leave. He had dealt with the 3 punks, but he knew how humiliation worked. It didn't end quietly. By mid-afternoon, whispers had already spread around town. Jack's phone buzzed with a message from Mary at the diner. "They've been asking about you." "Careful." Jack set the phone down, staring at the chipped mug in his hand. It wasn't fear for himself. It never had been. It was the thought of trouble finding Emily that made his jaw clench. He drove her to school, kissed her forehead, and watched until she disappeared through the doors. Then he parked a block away, sitting in his truck, eyes on the street. The instincts of a soldier never left. They simply lay dormant, waiting. And now they stirred awake, sharpening every sound, every movement around him. By evening, the trouble he expected arrived. The diner was quieter than usual when Jack stopped by for a coffee. A few regulars gave him nervous nods, their eyes darting to the window. Outside, a black pickup truck idled, its engine rumbling like a warning. Mary leaned over the counter, whispering, "Jack, they're back." But not just the 3. They've got more with them this time. Jack sipped his coffee slowly, as if nothing in the world could rattle him. "How many?" 6, maybe 7. "They've been circling since noon. One of them said something about making an example out of the old man." Jack exhaled through his nose, calm but heavy. He set his mug down, stood, and placed enough cash on the counter to cover every table in the diner. "Close up early tonight, Mary. Take the back door out." Her eyes widened. "Jack, what are you?" "Just do it." His tone was gentle but absolute, the kind of tone soldiers used when hesitation could cost lives. Mary hesitated, then nodded. When Jack stepped outside, the air carried the weight of a storm. The black pickup revved its engine, and 7 men emerged, young, reckless, each gripping something in their hands. Bats, chains, knives. The leader from last night stood at the front, wrist still bandaged, fury twisting his face. Well, he sneered. "Thought you could humiliate me, huh? Thought you could just walk away. Not tonight, old man. Tonight we end this." Jack stood in the glow of the streetlight, shoulders squared, eyes steady. "Go home," he said quietly. The gang laughed, their voices echoing down the street. The leader stepped closer, chain clinking in his hand. You think you scare me with your little war stories? You're nothing now. Just a washed-up vet hiding behind a tattoo. Jack's voice dropped lower. You've made two mistakes. The first was last night. The second is right now. That flicker of doubt crossed their faces again. The same crack in confidence they had felt in the diner. But the mob behind the leader pushed him forward, pride louder than sense. Get him. They surged forward like a tide, weapons raised, and then the world shifted. Jack moved with precision born from years of brutal necessity. The first swing of a bat missed as Jack stepped inside the arc, his elbow driving into the attacker's jaw. The man crumpled before his body even realized it had been hit. Another charged with a chain, but Jack twisted, grabbed his wrist, and slammed him into the truck with a force that left him gasping. Two more came at once. Jack ducked the knife, pivoted, and swept the man's legs out from under him before spinning to grab the other by the collar and hurl him into the pavement. The sound of bodies hitting gravel filled the night. But numbers had their weight. Hands grabbed at him from behind, a fist clipped his shoulder, a chain struck his ribs. Pain flared, sharp and hot, but Jack absorbed it, his training guiding every counter. He fought not like a man brawling in the street, but like a predator surrounded, efficient and unrelenting. The leader stood back, watching in disbelief as his men fell one after another, groaning and clutching broken pride on the pavement. His face twisted with rage. You think this makes you a hero? He shouted. Jack finally turned to him, chest rising steadily, eyes burning cold. No. It makes me a father. And fathers don't lose. The leader screamed, charging with his chain raised high. But Jack stepped forward, catching his arm mid-swing, and wrenched it behind his back. The chain clattered to the ground. Jack whispered in his ear, his voice deadly calms. Walk away before I forget I'm done fighting wars. Then he shoved him to the ground, the message final. The gang, beaten and broken, scrambled to drag each other back to the truck. Their bravado was gone, replaced by fear that ran deeper than their bones. The leader shot Jack one last look. Not of victory, but of something more dangerous. Hatred. As the truck screeched away, Jack stood alone in the empty street, his body aching but his mind sharper than it had been in years. The instincts he had buried were awake now, fully alive. And deep down, he knew this was no longer about bar fights or bruised egos. Something worse was coming. When he got home, Emily was asleep on the couch, the movie still playing on the TV. Jack tucked a blanket over her, his eyes lingering on her small face. He whispered to himself, voice horsey, I can't let this reach you. I won't. But outside, somewhere in the dark, he could feel the storm gathering. Next day, the town carried on like nothing had happened, but beneath the surface, the air was heavy with unease. Word of the diner fight and the street brawl had spread faster than wildfire. Everyone had a version of the story. Jack standing against 7 men, Jack moving like a ghost. Jack dropping them one by one with nothing but his hands. The whispers grew louder. Delta Force. Special Operations. Legend. Jack hated those whispers. He hadn't survived all he'd seen, all he'd lost. Just to have his past dragged back into the light. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who had done what needed to be done in the shadows, and he carried the weight of those shadows every day. Now, they were closing in again. Emily noticed it too. That evening, as they sat at the table for dinner, she looked at him with worried eyes. Daddy, people at school were talking. They said you hurt some guys. That it was scary. Jack paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. He set it down and forced himself to meet her gaze. Emily, I need you to understand something. I don't want to hurt anyone. But sometimes, people make choices that force you to stand your ground. That's all I did. She frowned, small hands fidgeting with her napkin. But, are they gonna come back? Jack's heart tightened. He reached across the table, placing his calloused hand gently over hers. Not if I can help it. But deep inside, he knew the truth. The leader's eyes from last night haunted him. The kind of hatred that didn't fade, that grew and twisted into something more dangerous. That night, Jack's fears proved right. He woke to the sound of glass shattering downstairs. His body reacted before his mind caught up. Years of combat training surged through him. He rolled out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat he kept tucked behind the dresser, and crept down the hall. His heart hammered. Not from fear, but from the knowledge that Emily was asleep just down the hallway. Voices echoed through the living room. Harsh, angry whispers. At least 3. Jack's eyes narrowed. He slipped silently down the stairs, moving like a shadow. The intruders had kicked in the back window. One held a flashlight, another a crowbar. The leader was there too, his bandaged wrist visible in the beam of light. "Check upstairs," the leader whispered. "I want him to watch when we drag the brat out." Jack's blood went cold. His hand tightened around the bat. That was the line. That was the mistake these men would not walk away from. He moved fast. The man with the flashlight never saw the bat coming. It cracked across his ribs with a sickening thud, sending him sprawling. The crowbar swung, but Jack ducked low, jamming the bat's end into the attacker's gut. The man collapsed, gasping for air. The leader spun, knife in hand, but Jack was already on him. They grappled, bodies slamming into the couch, knocking over the coffee table. The knife clattered across the floor, but the leader fought with wild desperation. "You ruined me," he spat, trying to claw at Jack's face. "Everyone's laughing at me." Jack's fist connected with his jaw, snapping his head back. He pinned the man to the ground, one hand pressing down on his chest, his voice a low growl filled with lethal promise. "You came into my home," Jack said. "You threatened my daughter. That was your last mistake." The leader thrashed beneath him, but Jack's grip was unbreakable. For a split second, the old Jack, the one who had ended lives in deserts and jungles, flashed to the surface. He could feel the urge, that dangerous instinct whispering, "Finish it, end the threat." But then a soft sound cut through the haze. "Daddy!" Jack froze. Emily stood on the stairs, eyes wide with terror, clutching her stuffed bear to her chest. She had seen everything. The fight, the violence, the side of him he had sworn she'd never know. The leader felt the shift and tried to lunge again. But Jack slammed him back down with enough force to knock the breath from his lungs. He tied the man's wrists with the cord ripped from a lamp, then dragged him and his groaning companions out the door, dumping them in the yard. Blue lights flashed down the street moments later. A neighbor had called the police. Jack stood on the porch, his shirt torn, face bruised, Emily clutching his side, while officers cuffed the intruders. But the look they gave Jack wasn't simple gratitude. It was curiosity. One officer, older, with lines of service etched into his face, glanced at Jack's tattoo and stiffened. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "You were..." The officer started, then caught himself, lowering his voice. "Delta." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. The officer nodded, almost respectfully, and turned away, muttering to his partner. Emily looked up at her father, her voice trembling. "Daddy, who are you?" Jack knelt beside her, cupping her face in his rough hands. His eyes burned with the weight of truth he couldn't share. "I'm your dad. That's all you need to know." But in his heart, Jack knew the past had been dragged into the light, and soon, it wouldn't just be punks with bats and knives. Once the right people realized who he was, trouble would come looking. And this time, it might not stop at his doorstep. It might tear through his whole world. As he held Emily close, Jack whispered to himself like a vow, as much a prayer as a warning. "They'll never take you from me. Not while I'm breathing." And somewhere in the darkness of the night, a new enemy already stirred, drawn by the whispers of the Delta Force legend who had resurfaced. The days that followed blurred into a storm of unease. The town buzzed with talk, about the break-in, about the men Jack had taken down, about the tattoo that marked him as something far more than a mechanic. People stared a little longer when he walked past now, their whispers sharpening like knives. Jack didn't care what they thought of him. But he cared about Emily. She'd grown quieter, her big brown eyes always searching his face as though trying to read secrets he wouldn't tell. He hated the shadow his past was casting over her. He had built their life on silence, on burying who he had been. But silence no longer kept them safe. And then came the knock at his door. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the punks. It was worse. 3 black SUVs idled at the curb, engines rumbling. Men in dark suits stepped out, their posture too rigid, too sharp to be ordinary. At the front was a man Jack recognized instantly. Colonel Mason, one of his old commanders. The years hadn't softened him. His eyes were still like steel, his voice low and commanding. "Jack." Jack's stomach twisted. He hadn't heard that voice in over a decade. "You shouldn't be here." Mason stepped forward, gaze flicking to Emily, who peeked nervously from behind her father's leg. He gave her a small nod, almost kind, before returning his eyes to Jack. "Word's out. You've drawn attention. Those kids you tangled with. One of them's tied to a crew we've had eyes on. You stirred a hornet's nest." Jack's jaw clenched. "That's not my fight anymore." Mason's voice hardened. "It is now. Whether you want it or not." The words landed like a stone in Jack's chest. He'd always known this was possible. That one day the past would come knocking. He had tried to bury it, for Emily's sake. But now, with Mason on his porch, there was no denying it. Trouble wasn't coming. Trouble was here. That night, it struck. Jack was tucking Emily into bed when the first explosion shattered the quiet. The back of the house lit up in flames as Molotov cocktails burst through the windows. Emily screamed, clutching her bear as Jack scooped her into his arms and ran. Gunfire erupted outside. The punks were back, but not just them. Back now by real muscle, men in masks and leather. Their crew swollen into something closer to a gang war. They had come not just to scare Jack, but to destroy him. Jack burst through the front door, Emily clinging to him, smoke and fire spilling into the night. Mason and his men were already there, returning fire with precision. Bullets snapped through the air. The SUVs provided cover as civilians scattered down the block. Jack shoved Emily into Mason's arms. His voice cracked with the weight of everything he was. Get her out. Don't let her see this. Emily screamed, Daddy! Reaching for him. But Mason pulled her into the safety of the convoy. Jack turned, his face hardened, his body alive with instincts he had sworn never to unleash again. The fight was chaos. Men swarmed through the yard, armed and reckless, but Jack moved like a shadow among them. He struck with precision, every move deliberate, efficient. A disarmed rifle turned into a weapon in his hands. A blade flashing in the dark met only empty air before Jack slammed its wielder into the ground. But there were too many. Even with Mason's team, the tide pressed hard. The leader of the punks, bandaged, furious, his face twisted with hate, appeared in the chaos, shouting orders like a man drunk on vengeance. He pointed at Jack. Him, take him down. Jack's eyes locked on him. The world narrowed. This was the moment it all had been building toward. They collided in the burning yard, fists and fury colliding with years of experience. The punk fought dirty, fueled by rage and humiliation. Jack fought with control, each blow heavy with the weight of survival, of a father's promise. The fight was brutal. Every strike echoing with the ghosts of battlefields Jack had never wanted Emily to know existed. Finally, Jack disarmed him, wrenching the knife from his hand and pinning him to the ground. The firelight casting shadows across his scarred face. The punk spat blood, snarling, You'll always be a killer. You can't run from it. Jack's hand trembled, knife poised. The old instinct screamed to finish it, to end the threat forever. But then he heard it. Emily's voice, faint but cutting through the smoke and chaos. Daddy? He froze. The knife clattered to the ground. Jack leaned down, his voice steady, filled with something stronger than rage. You're right. I can't run from who I was. But I can choose who I am now. He stood, leaving the punk broken but alive, and turned to where Mason held Emily close, shielding her from the flames. The fight ended soon after. Mason's men scattered the rest of the attackers. Police sirens wailed in the distance, and the night quieted under the crackle of fire. Jack walked toward Emily, bruised and bloodied but unbowed. She ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist, burying her face against him. I thought I lost you. She whispered through tears. Jack held her tight, his own voice breaking. You'll never lose me, not while I'm breathing. Mason approached, his face lined with something close to respect. You still have it, Jack. The instincts, the fight. But this won't stop. You've made enemies. Jack met his gaze, then looked down at Emily. Then I'll protect her. No matter where it takes me. The colonel studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. Then maybe it's time the legend stopped hiding. As dawn broke, Jack stood on his porch. Or what was left of it. Holding Emily's hand. The town would see him differently now, the whispers louder than ever. But Emily leaned against him, her small hand in his, and for the first time in years, Jack didn't feel like a ghost. He wasn't just the man with the tattoo. He wasn't just the soldier who had once lived in the shadows. He was a father. And for her,